The rain came down in sheets over the old Victorian, washing the white Claboard in streaks of gray. Margaret Sterling stood at the kitchen window, her hands wrapped around a chipped porcelain mug, and watched the water cascade over the rose bushes she had planted 47 summers ago. The bushes were overgrown now, their blooms heavy and sodden, drooping under the weight of the storm. She had asked Richard Rode to trim them in the spring. He had said he would. He never did. She took a sip of her tea, but it had gone cold. She did not notice. Her mind was elsewhere, drifting through the rooms of the house like a ghost. She could still see Arthur in his favorite A-room chair, his reading glasses perched on his nose, a biography of some forgotten general open on his lap. She could still hear the clatter of her children's footsteps on the hot roadwood floors, the slam of the screen door, the laughter that used to fill the kitchen. That was all gone now. Richard Rode was a man of 52 with a receding hairline and a permanent furrow between his brows. His sister, Deborah, lived in Arizona and called once a year, if that. The grandchildren were strangers who sent Christmas cards with misspelled names. Margaret had given her life to this house. She had scrubbed its floors, polished its banisters, mended its curtains. She had hosted endless dinners, endless holidays, endless family gatherings. She had been the glue that held everyone together, and no one had ever thanked her. Not once. She was the mother, the grandmother, the widow, the CA retaker. She was the one who remembered birthdays, who sent checks, who made the potato salad and the pumpkin pie and the godforsaken green bean casserole that no one actually liked, but everyone expected. She was tired. It was a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that no amount of sleep could cure. She had been tired for years, perhaps decades, but she had never allowed herself to feel it. There was always something to do, someone to help, some crisis to smooth over. Richard Rode needed a down payment for his first house. Deborah needed tuition for graduate school. The grandchildren needed college funds, summer camps, braces. Margaret had written the checks without hesitation. It was her money, but it was her family. She had always believed that family came first. She still believed it. That was the tragedy. The back door banged open, and Margaret turned from the window. Richard Rode stood in the doorway, shaking rain from his expensive overcoat. He had a habit of entering without knocking, even though he no longer lived here. Patricia followed behind him, her heels clicking against the worn linoleum. She was carrying a large leather briefcase, the kind Margaret associated with lawyers and bankers. Margaret's heart gave a small, uneasy lurch. "Mother," Richard Rode said, his voice clipped. "We need to talk." She set down her mug and smoothed her apron. "Of course. Sit down. I'll make fresh tea." "We don't want tea," Patricia said. She was a handsome woman, crisp and efficient, with a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. She had never liked Margaret, and Margaret had long since stopped trying to win her over. "We need to discuss your living situation." Margaret felt a cold prickle at the base of her spine. "My living situation." Richard pulled out a chair and sat down heavily. His face was flushed, whether from the cold or from something else. Margaret could not tell. Patricia remained standing, her arms crossed over her chest. "It's about the house," Richard Rode said. "We've been talking, Patricia and I, and we think it's time for you to consider other options." "Other options?" Margaret repeated. "What kind of options?" Patricia opened the briefcase and produced a glossy brochure. She slid it across the table. Margaret glanced at it. It showed a cheerful-looking building with a manicured lawn and a sign that read Sunset Pines Retirement Community. The pictures inside featured smiling elderly people playing bingo and sitting in rocking chairs on a wide porch. "A nursing home," Margaret said slowly. "You want to put me in a nursing home?" "It's not a nursing home," Richard Rode said quickly. "It's an assisted living facility. It's much nicer. They have activities, and they serve 3 meals a day, and there's a nurse on staff 24/7. It's for your own safety." "My safety?" Margaret looked at him. He was her son. She had held him in her arms the day he was born, a squalling, red-faced infant with a tuft of dark hair. She had nursed him through chickenpox and broken bones and teenage heart break. She had paid for his law school tuition, his wedding, the down payment on his first house. She had never asked for anything in return. And now he was looking at her like she was a problem to be solved. Mother, you fell down the stairs last month, he said. You could have broken your hip. You're not as young as you used to be. I tripped, Marga Rhett said. It was an accident. I'm perfectly fine. You're not fine, Patricia interjected. You're forgetful. You left the stove on twice last week. Richa rode, and I can't keep worrying about you. Marga Rhett felt a flash of anger, hot, and Shah RP. I left the stove on once. And I turned it off myself. I am not forgetful. Rich ARD reached across the table and took her hand. His fingers were cold. Mother, we love you. We want what's best for you. And what's best is for you to be in a place where you can be properly CA read for. Who will CA re for me? Marga Rhett asked. You live in Florida. Deborah lives in Arizona. I am alone in this house. I have been alone for 3 years since your father died. And now you want to ship me off to some facility so you can sell this house and take the money. Rich ARD's face tightened. That's not fair. It's true, though, isn't it? Marga Rhett pulled her hand back. You've been eyeing this house for years. You told me yourself. Mother, you can't maintain this place on your own. Mother, the property tax is too high. Mother, you could get $1 million RS for this house if you sold it now. I heard every word. Marga Rhett. Patricia said, her voice hardening. There's no need for hostility. We're trying to help you. Help me, Marga Rhett laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're trying to help yourself? You want my house. You want my money. You've always wanted it. Rich ARD stood up abruptly. That's not true. We've never asked you for anything. Never asked. Marga Rhett stood as well, her knees creaking. Richa Road, I paid for your law school. I gave you the down payment for your house. I gave you the beach house in Nantucket. I've given you everything I have. And now you're telling me that I need to be institutionalized. Rich ARD looked away. Patricia stepped forward RD, her heels clicking with authority. Marga Rhett, this is happening. Richa Road has power of attorney, and we've already spoken to a realtor. The house will be listed next week. Marga Rhett felt the words like a physical blow. The room seemed to tilt. She gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. You're selling my house, she said. Without my permission. With your permission, Patricia said smoothly. You signed the papers, remember, after your fall. Richa Road explained everything to you. Marga Rhett urged her memory. She remembered the hospital room, the fluorescent lights, the morphine drip that made her feel floaty and confused. Richa Road had been there, holding her hand, telling her everything would be fine. He had put a stack of papers in front of her and said, just sign here, Mother. It's for the insurance. She had signed. She had trusted him. You tricked me, she said. Rich ARD's face flushed a deeper red. We did not trick you. We made a decision for your own good. You stole my signature. Mother, get out. Marga Rhett's voice was low, but it cut through the air like a blade. Get out of my house. Rich ARD opened his mouth to argue, but Patricia grabbed his arm. We're going, she said. But we'll be back. And next time, we'll have the realtor with us. They left, and the door slammed behind them. Marga Rhett stood in the kitchen, trembling. The rain had stopped, but the sky was still heavy, gray and bruised. She walked to the window and watched them climb into their car. Richa Road was on his phone. Patricia was checking her lipstick in the visor mirror. They did not look back. Marga Rhett felt something crack inside her. It was not her hip. It was deeper than that. It was the last thread of faith she had in her family, snapping under the weight of too many betrayals. She had given them everything. She had sacrificed her own dreams, her own needs, her own happiness, for the sake of people who did not even see her as a person. She was not their mother. She was a resource. That she walked through the house slowly, her hand trailing along the walls. The wallpaper was peeling in the hallway. The dining room chandelier needed new bulbs. The carpet on the stairs was threadbare. She had let it all go. She had been too busy, too tired, too overwhelmed. She had been trying to hold her family together, and they had been dismantling her life piece by piece. She stopped in the master bedroom and looked at the photograph on her nightstand. Arthur smiled at her from the frame, his eyes kind, his uniform crisp. He would have known what to do. He would have been furious. He would have thrown Richa Road out with a volley of curse words and a slammed door. But Arthur was gone, and Marja Rhett was alone as she sat on the edge of the bed and wept. Not loud, gasping sobs, but a quiet, steady flow of TRS that seemed to come from a place so deep she had forgotten it existed. She cried for Arthur, for the life they had built, for the children she had raised with such hope. She cried for the years she had wasted trying to be good, trying to be generous, trying to be the kind of mother who never said no. And then, when her TRS were spent, she sat up and wiped her face. Something had changed. She could feel it. It was like the moment after a storm, when the air clears and everything looks sharper, more vivid. She was no longer the woman who would smile and nod and sign whatever was placed in front of her. She was no longer the woman who would sacrifice everything for the sake of peace, but she walked to the closet and pulled out a small wooden box from the top shelf. It was covered in dust, and the hinges were stiff. She opened it carefully. Inside were stacks of letters, bank statements, and a collection of old legal documents. Arthur had been a rifleman. He had kept records of everything, their savings, their investments, their property. Marja Rhett had always left the finances to him, trusting him completely. After he died, she had trusted Richard Road. But now, she would trust no one. She pulled out Arthur's will, the original copy, not the one Richard Road had shown her. It was yellowed and brittle, but the language was clear. Arthur had left everything to her, explicitly, with no restrictions. And buried in the appendix was a codicil that Richard Road had never mentioned. It stipulated that in the event of Marja Rhett's death, the estate would be divided equally among her children. But it also contained a clause that gave her the authority to revoke any portion of the inheritance if a child attempted to unduly influence or coerce her. Marja Rhett's hands trembled as she read the words. She had signed a power of attorney, yes, but she had signed it under duress. Richard Road had manipulated her, lied to her, taken advantage of her illness. And now she had the proof. She sat on the bed and thought. She was not going to fight. Not yet. She was going to wait. She was going to let them think they had won. She was going to let them sell her house, take her money, and put her in that facility with its smiling residents and its endless bingo games. And then, when they least expected it, she was going to freeze every asset they had ever touched. She was going to revoke her power of attorney. She was going to expose every lie, every manipulation, every betrayal. She was not going to be a victim anymore. She was going to be a force. The phone rang. She did not answer it. She knew it would be Richard Road, calling to smooth things over, to offer false comfort, to make sure she was still compliant. She let it ring until the machine picked up. She heard his voice, tinny and distant. "Mother, I'm sorry if we upset you. We'll talk tomorrow. I love you." Marja Rhett read at the photograph of Arthur. "I love you too," she whispered. "But I'm done being a fool." She put the documents back in the box and returned it to the closet. She had work to do. Research, phone calls, a visit to a lawyer who specialized in elder abuse. She had no money of her own. Richard Road had seen to that. But she had friends, old friends, people who had known her before she became a mother, before she became a widow, before she became invisible. She would find a way. She walked back to the kitchen and made a fresh pot of tea. This time, she drank it hot, savoring the warmth. The rain had stopped completely, and a sliver of sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the dust motes in the air. Marja Rhett looked out the window at her rose bushes, battered but still standing. They would bloom again. So would she. She had no idea how long it would take. It could be months, even years. But she had time. She had patience. And she had the one thing her children had never expected her to have, a spine. The doorbell rang. She ignored it. She was busy planning her revenge. And revenge, she had Leah Rened, was a dish best served cold, with a side of legal documentation and a very long paper trail. Let them take the house. Let them take the money. Let them think they were safe. She would be back. And when she came back, they would be the ones begging from the kitchen window. She watched the sun set over the street, painting the houses in gold and crimson. It was the most beautiful sunset she had seen in years. She smiled, and for the first time in a long time, the smile reached her eyes. She was not gone yet. She was just getting sta route. 3 months passed. Marja Rhett let them take the house. She had watched the for sale sign go up on the front lawn, a bright red flag of surrender that made her stomach turn. She had watched the parade of strangers tromp through her living room, their shoes scuffing the roadwood floors, their fingers trailing along her grandfather's crown moldings. She had heard their comments. The kitchen is so outdated, the roof must be ancient, we'd have to gut the place, and she had said nothing. She had smiled her tight, polite smile and offered them tea, and when they left, she had retreated to her bedroom and sat in the dark este ring at Arthur's photograph. Richard Road and Patricia had been relentless. They had brought in a realtor, an appraiser, a home inspector. They had presented her with a stack of forms, each one more complicated than the last, and they had explained, in rueful tones, that this was all for the best. Margaret had signed everything they placed in front of her. She had not argued. She had not cried. She had simply nodded and signed, and when Richard Road patted her hand and said, "You're doing the right thing, Mother," she had looked him in the eye and said, "I know." She had made her own preparations. In the weeks before the move, she had quietly visited a lawyer, not Ms. C.A. Revere, not yet, but a young associate at a small firm who specialized in family law. She had paid him in cash, a few $100s she had hidden in her underwear or drawer for emergencies. He had looked at the documents, at Arthur's will, at the codicil that Richard Road had conveniently forgotten, and he had whistled low. "Mrs. Sterling, you have a strong case," he had said. "But you need to be patient. You need to let them make the first move. If you challenge them now, they'll fight you, and they have resources. But if you wait, if you let them think they've won, they'll get sloppy, and then you can strike." Margaret had nodded. How long, he had shrugged. A year or maybe less. It depends on how greedy they get. Patience. That was the word she repeated to herself every morning when she woke up in the nursing home. She had been placed at Sunset Pines, the cheerful facility from the brochure, and it was exactly as advertised, bright, clean, and profoundly lonely. Her room was small, with a single bed and a window that faced a parking lot. The meals were edible but bland. The activities were interminable. She had made a few friends, a retired schoolteacher named Emma Rajori, a former airline pilot named George, but she could not tell them her plan. She smiled. She played bingo. She attended the afternoon craft sessions and made lopsided clay pots that no one would ever use. She was the perfect resident, the model of compliance. But inside, she was counting the days. Richard called every Sunday. His voice was cheerful, almost triumphant. He talked about the house sale. It had closed quickly, at a price above asking, and about the renovations he was planning for the Boca Raton condo. He mentioned Patricia's new car, the children's private school tuition, a second honeymoon to the Bahamas. He did not mention Margaret's allowance, which had been reduced to $150 a month, rely enough for shampoo and toothpaste. He did not mention that he had taken full control of her investment portfolio, withdrawing funds for expenses he never specified. He did not mention that he had frozen her access to her own bank account. Margaret listened to all of it, and she made notes. On a small pad of paper, hidden beneath her mattress, she recorded every date, every amount, every realist admission. Richard Road thought he was talking to a senile old woman. In truth, he was confessing to an archivist. The turning point came on a Thursday. It was late autumn, the leaves outside the nursing home window a patchwork of gold and brown. Margaret was in the common room, knitting a scarf for a charity drive, when the television caught her eye. A financial news program was running a segment on elder abuse, and a lawyer was explaining the signs. "Fraudulent transfers," he said, often disguised as gifts or administrative fees. Families should watch for sudden changes to wills, unexplained withdrawals, and the isolation of the elderly from their social networks. Margaret set down her knitting. She had never heard the term fraudulent transfer before, but she knew it in her bones. She had been the victim of one, and she was going to prove it. She excused herself to her room and called the lawyer. He answered on the first ring. "Mrs. Sterling, I was wondering when you'd reach out." "I'm ready," she said. "I want to freeze the assets. All of them, all of them. The trust, the portfolio, the proceeds from the house. Everything Richard Road has ever touched. I want to file a motion to revoke his power of attorney, and I want to subpoena his financial records." The lawyer paused. "That's aggressive. He'll fight you." Let him, Marga Rhett said. He's had 3 months of thinking he's won. It's time he Leah Renette otherwise. The process was slower than she had hoped. The courts were backlogged, and Richa RD's lawyers were skilled at delay. But Marga Rhett had time, and she had evidence. She had kept every bank statement, every canceled check, every email that Richa Road had ever sent her. She had recorded phone calls. She had notes, dated and timed, of every conversation. She was not a frail old woman. She was a determined adversary. The first sign that Richa Road was worried came in December. He called her, not on Sunday but on a Wednesday, his voice tight. "Mother, I've been told you're trying to freeze the trust." "Is that true?" "Yes," she said calmly. "Mother, you can't do that. That's our money. Patricia and I have been using it for what?" Marga Rhett interrupted. "For the condo, for the new CAR, for the second honeymoon. I heard every word you said." Richa Road. I just didn't respond. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. When Richa Road spoke again, his voice was different. It was the voice of a man who had just realized he was not as clever as he thought. "What do you want?" "I want what was stolen from me," Marga Rhett said. "The house, the money, my dignity, and I want a full accounting of every cent you have taken." "Mother, you can't." "I can and I will. I have a lawyer. I have a court date. And I have a file full of evidence that would make a very interesting story in the Boca Raton Society pages. Do we understand each other?" Richa RD hung up. Marga Rhett smiled and turned back to her knitting. Over the following weeks, the tension escalated. Patricia called, her voice sharp with indignation. Deborah called from Arizona, confused and angry. Richa RD's lawyers sent threatening letters. Marga Rhett ignored all of them. She was no longer the woman who rolled over at the first sign of conflict. She was a woman who had finally found her voice, and she was not going to be silenced. The court hearing was scheduled for a cold January morning. Marga Rhett dressed fully in the navy dress and PRL necklace she had saved from the house. She arrived at the courthouse with her lawyer, and she walked through the metal detectors and the long, marble hallways like a queen entering her throne room. Richa Road was there, pale and sweating, flanked by his own attorney. Patricia was in the back row, her face a mask of concealed fury. Marga Rhett did not look at them. She sat at the plaintiff's table and unfolded the documents she had spent months assembling. The judge, a gray-haired woman with tired eyes, looked over the filings and then at Marga Rhett. "Mrs. Sterling, this is a serious accusation. You prepare read to proceed." "I am," Marga Rhett said, "and I have evidence that my son has committed elder financial abuse. I am requesting a freeze on all assets in his control, and I am seeking full restitution." Richa RD's lawyer stood up. "Your Honor, this is a family dispute. We request a continuance." "Denied," the judge said. "I've read the filings. Mrs. Sterling's evidence is substantial. I'm granting the freeze pending a full audit. Mr. Sterling, you are reordered to produce all financial records within 30 days. Richa RD's face went white. Patricia burst into tears. Marga Rhett sat very still, her hands clasped on the table, and she allowed herself a single moment of triumph. She had won this round. The next round would be even sweeter. After the hearing, Richa Road approached her in the hallway. His eyes were red, and his hands were shaking. "Mother, please. We can work this out. We don't have to go to trial." Marga Rhett looked at him, this man who had taken everything from her and asked for more. She felt a flicker of pity, but it was drowned out by a deep, steady resolve. "Richa RD," she said, "you had yours to work this out. You chose to steal from me. You chose to lie to me. You chose to put me in a nursing home and pretend I didn't exist. And now you have to face the consequences." He reached for her hand, but she pulled it away. "I'm still your mother," she said, "but I'm not your doormat. And I am not your bank." She walked past him, out of the courthouse and into the cold winter air. The sun was shining, and the city was a glittering expanse of steel and glass. She had won the battle. She would win the war or dot that night. She sat in her nursing home room and dialed a number she had been saving for a rainy day. It was the number of a small newspaper reporter who had once done a story on elder abuse in the county. "I have a story for you," she said. "It's about a mother, a mansion, and a son who thought he could take it all. I think your readers will be very interested." She hung up and looked at the photograph of Arthur. I'm sorry it took me so long, she said. But I'm finally doing what I should have done years ago. I'm fighting back. Arthur's smile seemed to widen in the frame. Marga Rhett turned off the light and lay back on her pillow. She had no idea what the next day would bring. She had no idea if she would ever see her mansion again, or her grandchildren, or the life she had lost. But she knew, for the first time in years, that she was in control. And that was all that mattered. She was not done yet. The begging had only just begun that the article Ape read on a Tuesday morning, buried on page 6 of the local newspaper, but blazing across the digital edition like wildfire. Marga Rhett had given the reporter everything. The documents, the timelines, the recorded phone calls. The headline read, "Widow accuses son of elder financial abuse in multimillion-dollar estate battle." Beneath it was a photograph of Marga Rhett from her younger days, taken at a charity gala, radiant in a silk gown. She had chosen it deliberately. She wanted the world to see the woman she had been, not the frail resident of Sunset Pines. By noon, her phone was ringing off the hook. Marjorie called from the common room, breathless with excitement. Marga Rhett, did you see the paper? I can't believe it. Your own son. George called next, his gruff voice tinged with admiration. Never took you for a fighter, Margie. Good for you. But the call that mattered came from Richard Road. His voice was raw, ragged, stripped of all pretense. Mother, what have you done? Do you have any idea what this is going to do to our family, to my reputation? I could lose my job. Marga Rhett sat in her chair by the window, the morning sunlight warming her face. She felt surprisingly calm. You should have thought about your reputation before you stole from me, Richard Road. You can't just. This is going to be all over the internet. The children will see it. The neighbors. My clients. Then perhaps you should have been a better son. There was a long, shuddering pause on the other end of the line. When Richard Road spoke again, his voice was smaller, almost childlike. Mother, I'm begging you. Please stop this. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Tell them you're confused. Confused. Marga Rhett let the word hang in the air. I have never been more clear-headed in my life. I have bank statements, Richard Road. I have emails. I have the codicil to your father's will that you conveniently forgot to mention. The one that says any undue influence over my assets forfeits your inheritance entirely. Mother, you wouldn't. I already have. Marga Rhett picked up a paper from her bedside table. I've filed the papers to revoke your power of attorney. I've frozen the trust. And I've submitted a formal complaint to the State Bar Association about your financial advisor's conduct. You have 30 days to produce a full accounting. If you don't, I will pursue criminal charges. The silence that followed was so profound that Marga Rhett could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent light above her. She had waited months for this moment. She had endured the cold meals, the lonely nights, the endless bingo games. She had smiled and nodded while her son dismantled her life. And now, at last, she had the upper hand. You can't do this, Richard Road said. But the words lacked conviction. I'm your son. I know, Marga Rhett said. And I have loved you every day of your life. But love does not mean surrender. Love does not mean allowing someone to destroy you. I have learned that lesson. It has cost me everything. But I am finally learning it. She hung up and set the phone aside. Her hands were steady. Her heart was calm. She was ready. The next few weeks were a flurry of legal activity. Marga Rhett's lawyer, a sharp-witted woman named C.A. Revere who had taken over from the young associate, filed motions, subpoenaed records, and deposed witnesses. Richard R.D.'s attorney fought every step, but the evidence was overwhelming. The bank statements showed transfers that had no explanation. The emails revealed a pattern of manipulation. The realtor's testimony confirmed that Richard Road had pressured Marga Rhett to sign documents she had not fully understood. Marga Rhett attended every hearing, sitting straight-backed and composed in the front row. She watched Richard Road squirm, watched Patricia cry, watched the facade of their perfect family crumble like dry plaster. She did not gloat. She simply observed. She had been invisible for so long that being seen, truly seen, was its own kind of victory. But the real turning point came on a gray February afternoon. Marga Rhett had just returned from a hearing when she received a message from her oldest granddaughter, Emily. The message was brief, typed in the frantic shorthand of a young person. Grandma, I need to see you. Please. It's important. Emily arrived at Sunset Pines the next day. She was 19, with her father's gray eyes and her mother's sharp cheekbones. She was also shaking. She sat on the edge of Marga Rhett's bed, clutching a worn leather backpack, and she spoke in a rush of words. Grandma, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. Dad told us you were happy here. He said you wanted to sell the house. He said you were getting forgetful. Marga Rhett reached out and took Emily's hand. I know. Your father told you what he wanted you to believe. That's not your fault. But I should have visited. I should have called. I've been so stupid. You were a child, Marga Rhett said gently. You are still a child. This is not your burden to carry. Emily looked at her, her eyes bright with unshed tears. I'm not a child anymore. And I want to help. I've been reading the articles. I've been talking to my friends. There's a group on campus. They advocate for seniors' rights. I want to be part of this. I want to stand with you. Marga Rhett felt a warmth spread through her chest, a sensation she had almost forgotten. It was the feeling of being loved, not for what she could provide, but for who she was. That would mean the world to me, she said. But you have to be careful. Your parents will be angry. I don't carry, Emily said fiercely. They're the ones who should be ashamed. Not you. Never you. The visit changed something in Marga Rhett. It was not the legal victory she had been waiting for, but it was something deeper, something more personal. She had been so focused on revenge that she had forgotten the possibility of reconciliation. Not with Richa Road. That bridge was ash and smoke, but with the rest of her family. With Emily. With the grandchildren she had been denied for so long, as she called her other grandchildren over the following weeks. Her younger grandson, David, was a quiet teenager who loved photography. He sent her a picture of the rose bushes at the old house, which had been torn out by the new owners. I miss your den, Grandma, he said. The youngest, Lily, was only 12, but she wrote Marga Rhett a letter in Lupe, Renest handwriting, telling her that she was the bravest person I know. Marga Rhett saved every word. She stored the photos and the letters in the wooden box she had brought from the house, alongside Arthur's will and the codicil. It was no longer just a box of evidence. It was a box of hope that the legal proceedings continued to grind. Four-way road. Richa RD's financial records were finally produced, and they were damning. He had taken nearly $500,000 RS in unauthorized transfers. He had used Marga Rhett's money to pay for his children's private school tuition, for a boat he had never mentioned, for a second property in the mountains that Patricia had always wanted. He had lied to his sisters, to his children, to everyone. Marga Rhett's lawyer called her with the news. We have enough to prosecute, C.A. Rivers said. The district attorney's office is interested. They want to make an example. Marga Rhett considered the words. She thought about Richa Road, her firstborn, the boy who had once fallen off his bicycle and come running to her with scraped knees. She thought about the YRS of love, the YRS of sacrifice, the YRS of betrayal. And she thought about Emily, David, Lily, the children who were watching, who were learning from their father's mistakes. I don't want to prosecute, she said. C.A. Rivers was silent for a moment. Mrs. Sterling, I understand your position, but I don't want to destroy him, Marga Rhett said. I want him to learn. I want him to pay back what he took. I want him to apologize, genuinely, to every person he lied to. And I want him to sign a document acknowledging that he will never have control of my assets again. But I don't want him to go to prison. That would hurt my grandchildren, and they have done nothing wrong. C.A. Rivers sighed. That is very generous of you. But I should warn you. He may not accept those terms. Then he can go to trial, Marga Rhett said. But I'm giving him a choice. That's more than he ever gave me. She called Richa Road the next day. He answered on the first ring. His voice worried. Richa RD, she said. I have an offer for you. A way out. But you have to listen. C.A. fully. She outlined the terms. Full repayment, a public apology to the family, a complete surrender of all financial control. She did not ask for anything else. She did not ask for an admission of guilt in court or a criminal conviction. She just wanted her money back and her freedom. Richa Road was silent for a long time. Then he said, You want me to admit to my children that I stole from you? Yes. And you want me to pay back every cent? Yes. And if I don't, then I will let the prosecutors do their job. And you will go to prison. The choice is yours. Rich ARD broke down. He was crying, ugly, gulping sobs that made Marga Red's heart ache despite everything. Mother, I'm so sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I thought, I know what you thought, she said. You thought I would always be there. You thought I would always forgive you. And I have. I have forgiven you 1,000 times. But forgiveness does not mean I have to trust you. And it does not mean I have to let you do it again. He accepted the terms. He signed the documents. He wrote a letter to his children, a long and painful letter that Marga Red had not asked to read, but that Emily Shaw read with her anyway. It was full of shame and regret, and the kind of self-awareness that could only come from being backed into a corner. I don't know if he means it, Emily said. But I think he's trying. Marga Red nodded. That's all I can ask for. That and my money. The money came back, slowly at first, then in larger sums. Marga Red's condo was purchased, her expenses covered, her future secured. She moved out of Sunset Pines on a warm spring morning. The same morning the first roses began to bloom in her new garden. She did not look back. She had spent too many years looking back the day she moved into her new home. Richard Road came to help. He carried boxes, unpacked dishes, hung pictures on the walls. He did not complain. He did not check his phone. He simply worked, and when he was done, he sat on her balcony and looked out at the water. Mother, he said, I'm still sorry. I'll always be sorry. Marga Red sat beside him. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. She did not reach for his hand, but she did not turn away. I know, she said. Now show me. Marga Red's condo smelled of fresh paint and the faint sweetness of the roses she had planted on her balcony. The moving boxes were gone, replaced by furniture she had chosen herself. A blue velvet sofa, a sturdy oak dining table, and a bookshelf that groaned under the weight of her favorite novels. She had bought new towels, new sheets, new everything. She had not realized how much she had been living in the past until she root building her future every morning. She woke to the sound of seagulls and the distant rumble of boats in the harbor. She made her coffee in a French press, a small indulgence she had always wanted but never permitted herself. She sat on her balcony and watched the sun rise over the water, and she felt a peace that she had not known was possible. It was not the peace of forgetting. It was the peace of acceptance. She had been wronged, but she had survived. She had been betrayed, but she had fought back. And now she was free. The grandchildren visited often. Emily came every weekend, her backpack stuffed with textbooks and a notebook filled with notes for a paper she was writing on elder advocacy. David showed up with his camera, taking photographs of Marga Red's garden, her bookshelf, the light slanting through her windows. He was quiet, but his photographs spoke volumes. He captured her hands, red but steady, holding a cup of tea. He captured her smile, which had grown wider in recent weeks. He captured the way she looked at the water, as if she were seeing it for the first time. Lily came with her mother, Patricia, on a Saturday in late spring. The visit was awkward, strained by months of legal battles and public shame. Patricia had lost weight. Her hair was grayer than Marga Red remembered. She looked older, tired, the sharp edges of her ambition worn down by the weight of consequences. I wanted to come, Patricia said, standing in Marga Red's living room, her hands clasped in front of her. I wanted to say, I'm sorry, for everything. Marga Red studied her daughter-in-law. She had never liked Patricia, but she had never hated her either. She had simply accepted her, the way one accepts a persistent headache. But now, looking at her, Marga Red saw something she had never noticed before. Patricia was afraid. She was afraid of losing her husband, her status, her carefully constructed life. She was afraid of being judged, of being abandoned, of being left alone. I accept your apology, Marga Red said. But I need to know that you understand why I did what I did. Patricia nodded, tears filling her eyes. I understand. We took advantage of you. We treated you like a problem instead of a person. I don't know if I can ever forgive myself. That's not my job, Marga Red said. Forgiving yourself is your responsibility. My job is to decide whether I can trust you again. And that, Patricia, is going to take time. Patricia stayed for an hour. She helped Lily water the roses on the balcony. She listened as Marj Rhett talked about Arthur, about the EARLYRS of her mariage, about the dreams she had given up for her family. She did not interrupt. She did not make excuses. She just listened. And when she left, she hugged Marj Rhett for the first time in YRS. I'll try to do better, she said. Marj Rhett nodded. That's all I ask. The legal battle was over, but the emotional work had only just begun. Marj Rhett had spent decades suppressing her feelings, and now they were flooding back. Anger, grief, relief, hope. She was Leah Renning to name them, to sit with them, to let them pass. She was Leah Renning that healing was not a straight line. It was a spiral, looping back over old wounds, but each time from a higher vantage point, she began to write. Not for publication, not for anyone else, but for herself. She filled notebook after notebook with memories, fragments of her childhood, her courtship with Arthur, the YRS of raising children, the long, lonely stretch of widowhood. She wrote about the mansion, the rose bushes, the kitchen window. She wrote about Richard Road, the boy he had been and the man he had become. She wrote about forgiveness, and she wrote about justice. One evening, she called her lawyer. C.A. River, I want to do something for other people. I want to help other seniors who are re-going through what I went through. C.A. River was quiet for a moment. That's a wonderful idea, Mrs. Sterling. What did you have in mind? I don't know yet. But I have money now. I have time. And I have a voice. I want to use it. C.A. River connected her with a nonprofit that specialized in elder advocacy. Marj Rhett began attending meetings, speaking with social workers, sharing her story with other victims. She was not a professional. She was not a lawyer or a psychologist. She was just a woman who had been wronged and had fought back. And that, she Leah Rened, was exactly what people needed to hear. She became something of a local figure. The newspaper that had first published her story ran a follow-up, from victim to advocate. Marj Rhett Sterling's new mission. The article was picked up by La Ridger outlets, and suddenly Marj Rhett was being asked to speak at conferences, at community centers, at senior living facilities. She was not comfortable in the spotlight. She had spent her whole life in the shadows. But she was Leah Renning to stand in the light. Richard watched from a distance. He was still in Boca Raton, still trying to rebuild his CA rear, but he called more often now. His voice was different, less guaride, more open. He talked about his therapy, his financial counseling, the work he was doing to repair his relationships with his children. I don't expect you to trust me, he said, but I want you to know that I'm trying. That's all I can ask, Marj Rhett said. That, and the grandchildren's visits. They mean everything to me. I know. I'll make sure they keep coming. Marj Rhett believed him, not because he had Rened her trust, but because she had decided to give him a chance. It was a conscious choice, not a blind leap. She had Leah Rened that trust was not a gift. It was a bridge, built one plank at a time, and she was willing to help him build it. The summer came, warm and golden. Marj Rhett's balcony was a riot of color, roses, lavender, petunias. She spent her mornings there, reading and writing, and her afternoons at the nonprofit, helping others. She was busier than she had been in YRS, but it was a different kind of busy. It was purposeful. It was meaningful. One afternoon, a woman came to the nonprofit's office. She was small, gray-haired, with the hunched shoulders of someone who had Leah Rened to make herself smaller. Her name was Eleanor, and she had a story that was eerily familiar. A son who had taken over her finances, a daughter-in-law who had moved her into a facility, a house that had been sold without her consent. I don't know what to do, Eleanor said. I don't have any money. I don't have any proof. They said I was getting forgetful, but I'm not. I remember everything. Marj Rhett leaned forward and took Eleanor's hands. They were cold and trembling. I remember everything too, she said. And I know exactly how you feel. She told Eleanor her own story. She told her about the mansion, the nursing home, the son who had stolen from her. She told her about the long, lonely months of waiting, the legal battle, the victory that had felt more like survival than triumph. And she told her about the peace she had finally found on the other side. It's going to be hard, Marj Rhett said. But you can do it. You are stronger than you know. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears. I don't feel strong. Neither did I, Margaret said. But strength is not a feeling. It's a decision. And you have already made it by walking through that door. Margaret helped Eleanor find a lawyer, gather evidence, and file the necessary motions. She did not do it for glory or gratitude. She did it because she knew, deep in her bones, that no one should have to go through what she had gone through alone. The months passed. Margaret's life settled into a rhythm: work, family, solitude. She was content. She was not happy in the way she had been happy as a young bride, full of hope and expectation. This was a different kind of happiness, quieter and deeper, like the roots of a tree that had weathered many storms. That on a crisp autumn evening, Richa Road called with news. Mother, Emily is getting married. She wants you to be there. She wants you to give her away. Margaret felt a lump in her throat. What about you? I'll be there too, Richa Road said. But she asked specifically for you. She said you're the one who taught her what it means to be brave. Margaret closed her eyes and pictured Emily as a little girl, running through the mansion's hallways, her laughter echoing off the walls. She had missed so much of her grandchildren's lives. But she was determined to be part of their futures. I would be honored, she said that the wedding was held at a small chapel by the sea. Margaret wore a pale blue dress and the pearl necklace Arthur had given her. She walked Emily down the aisle, her arm firm, her steps steady. Emily was radiant in white, her face glowing with the kind of joy that Margaret had not seen in years. As they reached the altar, Emily whispered, "Thank you, Grandma, for everything." Margaret squeezed her hand. "Thank you for giving me a reason to keep going." The ceremony was beautiful. The reception was joyful. Margaret danced with Richa Road, not as a mother and son who had been through a war, but as two people who were running to find their way back to each other. I'm proud of you, Richa Road said. I know I don't say it enough, but I am. Margaret smiled. I'm proud of you too, for trying. They danced in silence for a moment, and then Margaret pulled back. I have something to tell you. I've decided to update my will. Richa R's face tensed. Mother, I don't want to talk about that now. I know, she said, but I want you to hear it from me. I'm not cutting you out. I'm dividing everything equally between you, Deborah, and the grandchildren. And I'm setting up a trust for the nonprofit I've been working with. I want to make sure my work continues. Richa R.D. nodded slowly. I understand. I also want you to know, Margaret continued, that I forgive you. Not just for me, but for you. You're still my son. You always will be. But I'm not your safety net. I'm not your inheritance. I'm your mother. And that means something different now. Richa Road hugged her tightly. I love you, Mother. Margaret hugged him back. I love you too. Now go dance with your daughter. She's been waiting all night. She watched him walk away, and she felt a quiet sense of closure. It was not the dramatic revenge she had once imagined. It was better. It was a realignment, a recalibration of her life. She had not destroyed her son. She had saved herself. That night, she sat on her balcony and looked up at the stars. The air was cool, the water dark and still. She thought about Arthur, about the life they had shared, about the dreams they had built. She thought about the children, the grandchildren, the family she had fought so hard to reclaim. She was 75 years old. She had been through hell and come out the other side. She had lost her mansion, her fortune, her peace of mind. And she had gained something more valuable. Herself. She went to bed with a smile on her face, ready for whatever came next. The first snow of the season fell on a Thursday, dusting the city in a soft, white silence. Margaret stood at her balcony door, wrapped in a wool shawl that Emily had knitted for her, and watched the flakes drift down over the harbor. The rose bushes were dormant now, their branches etched against the gray sky like fine lines on old parchment. She had covered them with burlap before the frost, a ritual she had learned from her own mother, and she smiled at the memory. She had been living in the condo for nearly 2 years. The walls had absorbed her presence. The scent of her lavender sachets, the stacks of books on every surface, the photographs in silver frames that now lined the mantel. There was one of Arthur in his naval uniform, one of Emily in her wedding dress, One of the entire family at Thanksgiving, taken just last month. Everyone had come, Richa Road, Patricia, Deborah, all 3 grandchildren, even Patricia's sister from California. They had squeezed into her small dining room and eaten turkey off her grandmother's china, the same china that had once graced the mansion's long table. Marga Ret had watched them that evening, her family, fractured and healing, and she had felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the oven. They were not perfect. They were still navigating the wreckage of the past, still learning to trust each other. But they were together, and that, she had decided, was enough. That the doorbell rang. Marga Ret crossed the living room, her steps steady despite the ache in her knees, and opened the door. Emily stood on the threshold, her cheeks flushed with cold, a white bakery box in her hands. "Grandma, I brought your favorite, those almond cookies from the French place." She stepped inside, stomping the snow from her boots. "It's freezing out there. I don't know how you stand it." "I like the cold," Marga Ret said. "It makes the tea taste better." They settled in the living room, Emily curling up on the blue velvet sofa with her feet tucked beneath her. Marga Ret poured tea from the pot she had prepared, the same chipped porcelain mug she had brought from the mansion. The crack on the rim was still there, a tiny essay she had grown to love. "Grandma," Emily said, hesitating, "I need to tell you something. It's about Dad." Marga Ret's hands stilled on the teapot. "Is he all right?" "He's fine. But he's been talking to me lately, about everything. The house, the money, the nursing home. He's been going to therapy, like he promised. And he's been writing a journal, I think. He told me he wants to write a letter to you. A real one. Not just an apology, but an explanation." Marga Ret sat down across from her granddaughter. "An explanation for what?" "For why he did it." Emily set down her teacup. "He said he was SCA Red. After Grandpa died, he felt like he was the only one who could take care of everything. He thought he was being responsible, but he was really being selfish. He said he convinced himself that you didn't need the money, that you wouldn't miss it. And then he just kept going." Marga Ret had heard variations of this before. Richa Road had apologized, repeatedly, in words and in actions. But a letter was different. A letter was permanent, a document of accountability. It was the kind of thing she might have written herself, years ago, if she had had the courage. "I'll read it when he's ready to send it," she said. That Emily nodded. "He also said something else. He said he's been working with a lawyer to set up a fund for seniors who can't afford legal help. He wants to donate a percentage of his income every year. He wants to do something good with what he rented." Marga Ret felt her throat tighten. She did not know if she believed it. She had been fooled before, but she wanted to believe it. She wanted to believe that people could change, that the damage she had endured had not been for nothing. "That's a good thing," she said. "But it won't erase the past." "I know," Emily said. "He knows too. He said he's not trying to make it disappear. He's trying to make it count." The conversation drifted to other things. Emily's new job, her plans for the future, the book she was reading on women's history. Marga Ret listened, and she stored every detail in her memory, the way she had once stored bank statements and court documents. But these were not evidence. These were treasures. When Emily finally left, pressing a kiss to Marga Ret's cheek and promising to return next week, Marga Ret stood at the window and watched her disappear into the falling snow. The world was quiet, muffled in white, and the harbor was a sheet of silver glass. She thought about the mansion, the way the snow used to gather on the rose bushes, the way a Ruther would shovel the walkway with a grin on his face. She thought about the nursing home, the flickering light, the lonely nights. She thought about all the years she had spent being invisible, being used, being dismissed. And then she thought about the present, the living room, the stack of books she had yet to read, the grandchildren who called her every week, the nonprofit where she had found a new purpose, the women like Eleanor who came to her with their own stories, their own fears, and left with a shred of hope. She had done what she set out to do. She had frozen their inheritance, and they had begged. But the begging had not been the point. The point had been the awakening. The point had been the realization that she was not a resource to be harvested. She was a woman with a mind, a heart, a will of her own. The next morning, Marga Ret woke to a clear, blue sky. The snow had stopped, and the sun was rising over the harbor, turning the ice to diamonds. She dressed warmly and took her morning walk along the pier, her cane tapping against the frozen boa RDS. The air was sharp and clean, and she felt every breath as a gift as she stopped at the end of the pier and looked out at the water. The horizon was a pale line, soft and infinite. She thought about Arthur, about the life they had built, about the dreams they had shared. She thought about Richer Road, about the brokenness and the healing. She thought about herself, the woman she had become. I wish you could see me now, she whispered to the sky. I wish you could see what I've done. She did not hear an answer, but she felt one. A warmth in her chest, a sense of peace that had nothing to do with forgiveness or revenge. It was the peace of knowing that she had faced the worst and had not been destroyed. She had been bent, but she had not broken. That afternoon, Richer Road came to visit. He was alone, without Patricia, and he saw a thick envelope in his hands. He stood in her doorway, his face lined with the kind of weariness that only comes from honest work, and he held out the envelope. I wrote you a letter, he said. It took me a long time. I don't expect you to read it right away. I just want you to have it. Margaret took the envelope. It was heavy, dense with pages. She looked at her son, this man she had raised, this man who had hurt her so deeply, and she saw, beneath the shame and the guilt, a flicker of the boy he had once been, the boy who had fallen off his bicycle, the boy who had run to her for comfort. Thank you, she said. Would you like to sit down? He nodded, and they sat together in the living room, the envelope resting on the coffee table between them. The chipped porcelain mug was still there, filled with fresh tea. Margaret picked it up and took a sip. I kept this, she said, turning the mug in her hands. From the mansion. It was your grandmother's. I used to drink my morning coffee out of it, every day for 47 years. When they packed up my things, I made sure they didn't throw it away. Richard looked at the mug. I remember it. It was always on the kitchen windowsill. Everything changes, Margaret said. The house is gone. The rose bushes are gone. But this mug stayed. And so did I. She set the mug down and looked at her son. I don't know if I'll ever fully trust you again, but I know that we can keep trying. Every day, we can keep trying. Richard's eyes filled with tears. That's more than I deserve. Deserve has nothing to do with it, Margaret said. It's about choice. I choose to try. I choose to hope. And I choose to keep living. They sat in silence for a long time, watching the snow melt under the afternoon sun. The light streamed through the windows, catching the dust motes in the air, and the room felt warm and full when Richer Road finally left. Margaret picked up the envelope. She did not open it. She placed it on the mantel, next to Arthur's photograph, and she let it rest there. She would read it when she was ready. She would give it the time it deserved. That night, she stood on her balcony and looked up at the stars. The sky was clear, endless, a canvas of light that stretched beyond imagining. She thought about the mansion, the nursing home, the courtrooms, the victories and the defeats. She thought about the future, uncertain and bright. She was not waiting for anything anymore. She was not planning, not plotting, not preparing for the next battle. She was simply living. Living in the present, in the warmth of her small home, in the love of the family she had reclaimed. She went inside and turned off the lights. The chipped mug was in the sink, waiting for tomorrow's coffee. The envelope was on the mantel, waiting for tomorrow's courage. And Margaret was in her bed, waiting for tomorrow's sun. She slept peacefully for the first time in years. And when she woke, she did not think about revenge. She thought about the garden. She thought about the roses, dormant in their burlap, waiting for spring. They would bloom again. They always did. So would she.